mood for a quick compromise. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
We're pleased to have with us tonight Mikey Kaye. He is the UK's former military strategic planner. He spent 20 years as an RAF assault helicopter pilot. Mikey, good to have you back on the programme.
Hi, Christian.
What kind of thing do you think the Ukrainians might have used to blow this bridge up?
Well, I think the first thing that's really important to talk about, Christian, is there are rules in war, but when someone's backed in the corner or you have a strategic asset like Crimea, which very much is a strategic asset to Putin because of it's the home of the Black Sea Fleet, which gives Putin access to the Mediterranean. It's also home to the air power fleet, which protects the Black Sea Fleet from the air. This is hugely strategic for Putin. So when it comes to trying to get an advantage, when it comes to the rules of war, so to speak, there are ways around that. And if Ukraine can see an advantage to compromising what are called the logistics lines of communication, the LOCs, in order to resupply whatever's going on in Crimea from a Russian war perspective, then I think Ukraine will see that as fair game. As to your question, what was used to blow the bridge? I mean, anything could be used to blow the bridge as long as it's got explosive C4 type qualities. I think the question is not necessarily what material was used, but how it was done by the Ukrainians, how much was used, what is the intent of the Ukrainians in order to do this? And you'll have to forgive me here. Do we have empirical evidence to suggest that the Ukrainians actually blew the bridge? Have they admitted to that? That's the bit that I'm a little bit hazy on at the moment.
Yeah, because as per usual, the Ukrainians are maintaining their ambiguity about this. No doubt, though, it does complicate the logistical challenge for Moscow. If we were to explain it to people here in the UK, it's shaped a little bit like the Isle of Wight, although considerably bigger. Not easy to resupply by ship.
No, absolutely not. And I think, Christian, we spoke on this program not so long ago when there were myriads of cruise missile attacks going into Ukraine from Russia. And one of the areas where those cruise missile attacks were being launched from was the Black Sea Fleet from Crimea. And obviously, as these cruise missiles are going in from the Black Sea into Ukraine, they're going to have to be resupplied in some way. And that critical resupply line of communication will be across that bridge unless there's an alternate, which you've just alluded to, which is potentially, via sea. But when you start adding sea lines of communication to the mix, that's a different logistical challenge, and it adds a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, just in the context of the counter-offensive, they've told us this weekend that they've retaken 18 square kilometres, that's about 7 square miles, in the past week. That's in the east and in the south of the country. That means in total they've reclaimed about 81 square miles. Do you think an attack like this, taking out one lane of the bridge, will put further pressure on that and perhaps help them gain some further impetus in that counter-offensive?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm not Zelensky. I'm not in Zelensky's mind. But if you look at it from a campaign planning, warfighting perspective, anything that can delay a resupply, anything that can add severe tensions on the ability for Russia to be able to continue its objectives. What those objectives are is regaining some terrain. But the numbers that you're talking about in terms of how much terrain has been taken back by Russia, you also got to look about how many lives is that costing, how long is it taking, and how much capability is it requiring Russia in order to make these what I would call very limited gains. Because at some point, the logistical resupply aspect is the key for success in any war. There was a famous Russian general that once said, if you don't have the logistics supply, the war effort will run dry very, very quickly. And this is what we're seeing at the moment. And this has always been the problem with Russia's ability to launch any sustained counteroffensive. And so what the Ukrainians are doing are absolutely heading right to the nub of what will prevent them from doing that. In military parlance, Christian, we called that center of gravity analysis. And you look at what are the critical requirements, and the critical capabilities, and you kind of look at, what can you touch? What can you put a bomb on? Doesn't have to be necessarily a bomb. It can be an ideology. It can be anything. But what is the thing that you have to attack in order to bring the enemy to its knees? And I think, the bridge would have been high up there in the Ukrainian campaign center of gravity analysis to go after to prevent what Russia are trying to do at the moment, which is effectively reclaim territory and counter-offend.
So an outsized advantage, blowing up one line of the bridge, but also hugely important to morale, because there you have Vladimir Putin last week saying, the counter-offensive is floundering, and then they go and take out his bridge, and that damages Russian propaganda. But also it presumably is hugely important, not just to the morale of the soldiers, but to the Ukrainian people more widely.
Yeah, one of the other aspects of this center of gravity analysis, Christian, is, so I mentioned critical capabilities and critical requirements, is critical vulnerabilities. And, I would be flabbergasted if in the Russian campaign planning strategic process, they wouldn't have identified the bridge as one of their critical vulnerabilities. And therefore, what that would then lead you to do is, how do you defend that bridge at all costs from being compromised because of the significant consequence it will have if the Ukrainians manage to compromise that line of communication in any way? And so, this is all part of getting ahead of the drag curve, getting ahead of the game, understanding what your vulnerabilities are and how you defend those vulnerabilities at all costs, and then understanding what the consequences are and what the contingency planning is if that critical vulnerability is compromised. And now it's happened. I think what will be really interesting to see play out is the way that Russia deals with that. You mentioned using a sea line of communication, which is one contingency plan. But there are only so many contingencies that you can actually have until you get to what's called a culminating point. This is all campaign planning parlance, and if there's a culminating point, which is a consequence of the bridge being taken, then again, why were Russia leaving that bridge open to vulnerability? And how could they have prevented Ukraine from taking such an action?
Yeah, well, in the long term, it may prove to be a crucially important moment. Mike, it's good to have you on the programme. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Christian.